Please join us now for a moment of silence as we honor the American men and women serving the armed forces, as well as those serving as first responders. Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, welcome. This is our last budget meeting, presumably. Before we get into our discussion, we'll take public comments. Anybody have a question, comment from the public? All right, so we'll move right on to our discussion items, and our goal tonight is to give an informal nod to one of the three proposals put forward by the village manager last week. And then presumably then next week we will be introducing the budget, correct?
The 22nd, right.
22nd, right, next week, right.
Next week.
Okay. Great, so with that?
Okay, just a couple of little housekeeping things, or maybe more than housekeeping. Each of you have a pre-hole punched piece of paper to put in your capital section of your book. We noticed in the last 2 days that, in fact, your capital did not include the capital for the parking utility. So I do apologize. The only thing that's is in here is the handheld devices for our new Park Mobile system to be able to read the license plates automatically, and also the truck that we've discussed and actually spent some time on a month or so ago that would have a gated hatchbacky thing that would allow
That technical term?
that would allow us to collect the coins in it a little more efficiently. So that's the only two things that are in capital.
And just for all of our understanding, the handheld devices, what does that entail?
So that entails the PEO going across a lot, being able to read the license plate numbers so that we can compare it to the Park Mobile list, so we could come up with folks that are out of time and write tickets. Now, eventually, it could also implement, have an interface with e-ticket, I hope. But go ahead. Yeah.
And so parking authorities would, sort of twofold. One is they look at the meters, and if there's no money in the meter, then they would sort of waive this, whatever.
Well, remember, if it's Park Mobile, there will not be money in the meter.
Right, but if there's money in the meter, they have to do that, so it's doing both ways.
Yes, yeah.
And how many handheld things do we get?
This is 3, correct? 3. 3. Now, the other thing we were considering up until Friday, when we made a decision to hold off, is to have these automated readers that you can put on top of the PEO vehicles, so you can sail down the street and, pick up. The cost of that was fairly significant. It was about $100,000, and what we decided was that it made more sense to start with this, make sure we were used to it, make sure we liked the application before we went ahead and spent a lot more money on doing something that was far fancier.
And couldn't you take one of these handhelds and just sort of stick it on the side of the vehicle? Anyway.
So that's what that is.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments about that?
I would just comment that brings the capital budget then to about 3.8 million. I'm sorry, no, 3,180,000.
And remember, this is a separate utility, just like water, so it's not in, not that we don't have to back it up,
right,
but it's a separate capital.
Right. Okay.
So it's under the parking utility, as will be the garage and stuff.
Does it get reflected in the village capital budget? The prior number was 3,124,000. Do we keep the parking utility outside of that?
Separate.
I mean, I can understand with the water company, but the parking utility is separate also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to put it in with the village. Actually, I'm going to put it in the parking utility page. We have a section for parking utility. So that was section 1 of your budget overview 2 weeks ago. I thought I just saw Nancy Green.
Oh, you did?
Oh, okay. Oh, because the next thing I was going to discuss was the library. The other thing that we did is we spent some time, we met with the library on Friday, spent some time with Nancy and with Tony, her financial person, and then I spent time today with the head of the library board. We adjusted slightly the support for the library from the 17,000 we were recommending to 20, just to kind of even it out. It didn't change our 1.2%, so we did that. I don't want to speak for everybody, but it seems like everybody understood the rationale, and it's a go. So, Nancy's not here, but
And again, just to clarify, as you just said, that's in the recommended 1.2?
yes, that's in the recommended, 1.2%. Okay, so,
And it's very close to the budget that they submitted. It's not exactly what they were looking for. It comes up.
they were looking for, I mean, they had $58,000 in increases in their expenses. They were looking for the village to fund something like $34,000 around, and we are agreeing to fund $20,000 of that $34,000.
That's I thought about.
And that's within the
$14,000.
1.2%.
Anybody have any questions, comments on that? All right. Do you want to speak more generally? Just
Okay, I mean, again, we went through this last week. I'm not sure there's a whole lot I can add to this. In section, I guess it's section 19, we have the recommended budget of 1.2%. We've gone through all of the investments in that budget that will increase resident satisfaction and resident service, as well as introducing or having some more development of people on the staff. We also highlighted, some of the big ups and downs in the budget, and highlighted the risks last week. And so that was all out there last week. And do you have a question?
no, I was just saying. I know you fielded some questions, and there's been some conversations that have taken place.
Yeah, there's been some. I mean, we've provided information to Mike on the central dispatch, which really is not in these numbers. They're a separate entity, and they charge us, and what they're charging us this year is basically flat, slightly lower, but basically flat to last year and the year before and the year before that. And then we provided some allocation information. Well, we provided out to the whole council and some allocation information to the whole council relative particularly to parking utility. Just hearkening back to that conversation, we had been saying that the parking utilities allocations weren't quite, well, they weren't right. And in an attempt to right them, we redid them, based on our experience for the last year and probably the last 2 years. And as I've said earlier, I think that as we go further with the parking utility and as we go further with the garage, and as we do the studies that we need to get done to float a bond and look at pricing and revenue versus cost versus being able to support a revenue bond perhaps, I think we continually, not unlike parking itself, we continually have to rehone those numbers. So I would suggest that although I don't think the allocations are going to change that much next year, but we will have a director of part-time, a director of the parking facility. I think we look at it again and make sure we're right on those numbers or close. But again, we did not do an exhaustive analysis of how many minutes in a day I spend or how many minutes a day Heather spends or et cetera. But I think in certain cases, I think we're conservative. That's kind of the summary on the parking.
Why don't we see if anyone has any other questions at this point, and then we can go forward and see what our views are on things. Questions?
Yeah, I was just, I was going to wonder what the difference, why we're increasing the HR position from part-time to full-time. Because I remember originally that I was told there was some outstanding issues with personnel, and maybe it would take a few more hours to sort through them, but then it would at least stay part-time. And then it's a pretty big jump going to full-time, including benefits. So I was just wondering what the need is for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had this discussion at the first session. I think a couple of things here. I mean, there is an economic argument for this, but I'm going to put that aside for a minute. There's a lot of work to get done vis-a-vis human resources in this organization. And every day, people line up in front of Sharon's door, and I could say today, Heather and I spent more oodles of time with Sharon brainstorming issues around civil service and seasonal employment and stuff. So every day we have those kind of issues. But we also have broader issues on succession planning, people development, the correct structure that the organization should have, given the fact we have some significant retirements. So we're looking at our HR person to work on that organizational redesign. There are issues related to really putting strong process in place so that we not only do performance evaluation, but that we have a performance system where we adequately, because I think we all know this around the table, document folks so that we can take actions in a more timely way and really put that process in place, because frankly, and I think all of us have looked at this, the documentation is not that strong, for example. On top of all of those reasons to have HR presence, including the fact that we have 275 people, it's not like we're an organization of 40 or 50. The other positive is that we've reduced the legal budget for normal, human resources support and personnel support, and we reduced that. I think we reduced it about $60,000. Now, we also opened up one or two other line items for two other things that are occurring in the organization, but in speaking with Beth Hinsdale, et cetera, she would tell you that in the last quarter of 2014, she was not nearly as involved as she was earlier, because we now have someone that can do investigations. I mean, I can't go into detail, but we did have investigations last year based on certain charges that we had to use the labor attorney's office for, because we had no one to go in and do it that was objective, et cetera. So there is a associated expense reduction. And the last thing I would say is that what we did when we brought Sharon Matthews on is we maxed her at 29 hours a week, which is the maximum that we could do under Obamacare. And so we're not making a leap from 20 hours or 19 hours a week to 35. We're going from 29 to 35. And yes, if she accepts the benefits package, we will have a benefit cost associated with that. I don't want to go on and on, but that's kind of the rationale.
And it still couldn't be accomplished part-time? I mean, some of the negotiations and things like that with contracts won't be ongoing. They're going to be fires done, and police presumably would be done sometime this year. And then, of course, some of the longer-standing issues. I'm just kind of concerned that it's with the increase to salary and then possibly benefits and everything too. It just might be it's a pretty big increase.
It's my fervent belief that no, we cannot handle this with a part-time person. I just don't believe that. Not handle it well is what I would say. And we'd have to change plans on moving forward in certain ways, whether it be performance. We just went out with performance goals and objectives. I anticipate that Sharon will be really active with the leadership team. We have some big leadership decisions to make this year. We have a lot of interviewing to do. Sharon is the second interviewer. Yes? I suppose.
It appears, sorry. Just to reiterate one of the things
You can interrupt me. It's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
No, I just wanted to
kidding you.
pick up on a point that what the manager had said about investigations. Traditionally, the police department has been pulled into confidential investigations which severely taxes our already, strained detective bureau and whatnot. It puts us in a difficult position sometimes. Sharon's already been involved and pulling at least one or two investigations away from us that we really didn't need to be in. So that, whether, speaking to the point, I foresee that happening more often than not, because there are a lot of cases that fall into which could easily be an HR handled situation that in the past, due to the lack of that position or due to the lack of people in that position, either became something that we got handed to and tried to work it the best we could. Honestly, I don't think that's the most efficient use of my personnel. So I think that'd be hopefully a savings on us as we're facing already, trying to deal with the staffing issues that we'll be coming up with.
Yeah, and Tom, I don't know if you want to comment, but to the extent that I know that you guys were interviewing today again, I know that there's some interesting, I'm going to use the word conundrums because it's a favorite word and my favorite wine, white wine. But there are some conundrums around some of the positions that we're looking at that we're working on and we're working with other municipalities on. And I'm not pressuring you to say anything, but if you...
I'll just make a comment in that she has been extremely instrumental in guiding me through the hiring process, because it can be a bit of a quagmire. I should try to navigate civil service and find the right person.
And we have
We've
these
spent
issues.
hours interviewing people.
Yeah, and this whole issue of hiring provisionally comes up more times than you would care for it to come up. And so I think we have more than enough work for at least a year, if not more. And I think if we come to a point where we're running like a, what's that expression? Running like a machine, a well-oiled machine. There are other things that she can do for us. We talked about, we haven't really done a whole lot, as Dylan and I have brainstormed this a bit with a couple of the folks, the whole issue of introducing something like Six Sigma to the organization. We just don't have the resource and the staff. So there are other things. There's the whole issue that we've been talking about communications and stuff. So I think that there is more things. She's very talented, so.
And Chief Ward, if you could just add, is there like an average, every year, different cases that your department would have to investigate? I mean, if there's no average, if you could just kind of sort of give a quick synopsis of the last few years.
Within the last few, just recently within the last, we were just involved in something that started us down a road, which I can't.
Wait, I don't need any details.
can't.
Just, if there was 5 cases per year.
We'd already
there's
started expending time, and this also occurred at the same time as the shootings, our burglary investigations. So what happens is I only have so many detectives to handle this, and the problem then becomes getting them into the shift, getting them covering that, handling their other caseload. We've had a few instances over the past where we've been asked by the former manager to follow up on investigations. When I was in charge of the Detective Bureau, I had to handle a few which the availability of a full-time person to conduct those human resources and those employee investigations would have freed up the personnel. And if I can give an average, the perfect example is even under the event of, because it's already done with, the cases I did with our own personnel on that one incident that turned into a criminal investigation, but there were human resource issues that were involved in that. An investigation of that type took me 3.5 months at putting at least 40+ hours a week in above and beyond what I was doing, just trying to get that investigation done. Anytime I can take away, hours and hours and weeks of time away from that kind of, that kind of investigation. Not that we're not there. We'll do our best to support. And there are times that we start out with, if it's potentially criminal, it starts with us. And then what it should happen, and what's happened in the past, is we've had to go to either legal counsel or independent legal counsel to continue investigations that, frankly, could have been handled more cost-effectively by someone in that position. I'm just speaking from where we're at. It would take me a while to try and be able to research exactly the amount of hours, but I can tell you that any investigation of that type, you're talking not hours, you're talking days and weeks worth of time to properly do stuff. On the other thing, going with the hiring and ongoing training, there are opportunities to be had there. Hiring, we're just entering into a new situation where we're, the intergovernmental transfers, which will be something that we're going to need some help with. This will be the first time we've ever had to do that, but that's because we're in a position right now where we have to do that to maintain staffing.
So we've
Thank you.
also, I mean, whether or not we should do this, we've also advised others a bit outside of Ridgewood. And it goes with that, I'm not going to mention the municipality, but there have been mistakes that have been reported in the newspaper where people have been perhaps terminated unnecessarily and had to come back to haunt. So I think when you have a seasoned HR person on this, you have the chances, the risk goes down. And never mind the risk of doing something wrong vis-a-vis civil service. That also is a risk that we have. So,
Okay, thank you.
In my 2.5 years on the council...
That was my biggest concern, so I'm good now, sorry.
In my 2.5 years in the council, so many of the issues that have been had to be dealt with on an ad hoc basis, which takes away from the focus on strategic issues and strategic planning and intentional government, are issues like an employment practice that violated the Civil Service Act. I remember with the prior village manager, we had a very significant case that cost the village a lot of money, and a lot more than several years increase that we're looking at here. So there's an element of insurance in this. There's also, there were 4 collective bargaining agreements negotiated in the last year, the two blue and white and 2 fire contracts, and we have another one pending. And then there's the issue of somewhat inconsistent application of policies, particularly in respect to comp time, and where it was hard to point to the policy. Right. And there were a lot of deals, one-off deals here and there. So it struck me that if we're going to not be governing on a kind of an emergency basis, well, let's focus on this immediate problem because there's a lawsuit pending or there's a great exposure here in comp time, et cetera, it makes sense to have somebody minding that shop, and let's see how it works. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those expenditures for which there will be a dividend in the long run. So.
But do you have any other issues?
Actually, I do. I see Nancy Green is in the room, and we did discuss library already. I hate to see you sitting there anticipating the library discussion.
Well, yeah, I was
we
looking
waited for you to
you.
leave, and then we come now. But no, actually, there was a brief discussion of library, and I don't want to. Maybe you can summarize where we came
okay,
out.
maybe I should have waited because we were looking. We saw you, and
then we
you
thought you left.
disappeared, and then you came back again. No, I said that we had met on Friday. We had a good meeting. We shared ideas. We shared thoughts around the budgets. That we, I think, we came to some amount of closure. And I spoke to John Johansson today on the fact that we would help by funding $20,000 out of the $34,000 request, and also. I may not have mentioned capital before, did I? Did I mention capital? And that we would approve $50,000 worth of capital. And again, I know we're trying to get you numbers, but we do pick up in the Ridgewood budget, in the village budget, as opposed to library budget, the cost of that capital. So when you look at the numbers, they belie the fact that, in fact, and I think our estimate was between $7,000 and $8,000 over the next 15 years, given outstanding debt now, plus the $50,000 that we're backing for them. And next year, supposedly, we'll have another X amount of money that we back from a capital perspective. So we have to watch that, and I think Nancy and I would agree with John Johansson that we, before going to next year's budget, I think we need to have a discussion on how we want to handle this whole capital issue with the library particularly. So I don't know.
Yeah, just want to make sure Nancy had a chance to microphone.
Thank you. Well, I completely agree. It was very educational and helpful to meet in person with Roberta and Steve, our business manager, Tony Mathis, and I did. And we've spent, I certainly understand much better the overall perspective of the village budget and the issues that you're working on. And Tony and I spent a couple hours this afternoon. We took some of your suggestions, Roberta, in terms of delaying some decisions, and I think that we'll be able to, we're partly into the year now, well into the year now already, and we have a retiree, and we just won't replace that person with full-time at this point. And, we just want to work with you. We're very pleased to have your support.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing that came out, I mean, and again, this goes back, and Sharon has been asked to get involved with the library as well, but I think we share some issues regarding civil service and regarding how we treat part-timers and how we treat seasonal and the number of hours, and it's something that we could look at jointly and see if we could help each other. So we did share some new thoughts, I think.
And one of the things that we talked about that I think is important is that with that whole oil tank remediation from 1997, I just wanted to clarify that the amount that we need to use now is about $18,000. We had put in, the figure of $50,000 kind of as a safety in case, it seems like one thing leads to another with that. And we also spoke with Roberta about the possibility that we could, we're going to see if we can pay the startup cost for that, at least out of our operating budget now, and be reimbursed by the town later on.
Definitely. So what they want to do is start now. They'll pay it out of their operating budget. As soon as we get capital passed, we'll pay them. And the idea here is that we would put $25,000 aside for the remediation, which may or may not be enough, but they would have another $25,000 to play with based on their other, I don't mean play with, but play with based on their other requests.
Great, thanks, Nancy.
And then you asked if there were, thank you, Nancy. You asked if there were any comments. Are you looking for comments now on the
Yeah, we could just
on
go
the
over
budget?
all of
Thanks,
our,
Nancy.
any questions you have, and then we can
I
give
was
our
just
general
responding
view.
on the personnel issue, so maybe we should let Susan have the...
Yeah, before we give our general view. Do you have any questions, or?
Or any questions before we get to the recommendations?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Actually, just, Roberta, I wanted to understand correctly, how many hours is HR now?
29,
And that would go to,
35.
so we're talking about a 6-hour a week difference. And then I guess my next question,
I would also say, though, she's not working 29 hours a week. So, I mean, just as an aside.
okay.
More or less? I'm joking.
No, I mean, I talked to her on the weekends, I mean, this kind of thing.
Okay. So just as something that I had noted in, just bear with me, it's hard to go portrait, landscape. It's tough turning back and forth.
Okay.
You had indicated on one of the budgets that there was going to be a savings with the labor attorney for the police negotiations, but then I saw that there was a line item that said $35,000 to start for those same negotiations that you indicated were going to be a savings due to the HR person. So I just wondered in my mind, how do I reconcile that?
Okay, it's a good question. What I said was that there would be a general savings in using the attorney. And we saved in 2014 because, as I think I mentioned, we usually use the attorney to draft up the contract, and we didn't. So, in other words, Beth's fees were lower because Sharon wrote the contract, and the only thing Beth is doing, or updated the contract, the only thing Beth is doing is reviewing it. So all we get charged for is her review, right? So last year, when you compared to year over year, we didn't spend that money at the level that, despite the fact we spent a lot of money on legal, okay? So what I did say was that we will continue to use Beth's firm less and less for normal stuff. I never committed that we would not use an attorney if we needed to on the police negotiations. And I can't really go into where we are on the police negotiations right now.
In fact, you've allocated additional money.
What we did is we post-fact, post the first set of budget reviews, we added additional money based on situational changes.
Okay, so then,
So I think we took out, Steve, just correct me, I don't want to misstate it. I think we took out something like $60,000 from a normal budget from the actual of last year for the labor attorney, and we did put a separate line item in to cover the police negotiations. Yeah, that's about right, right, Steve? I got that? Okay.
Last year's expended for labor attorney expenses was $96,210, and we budgeted 60, and this year we're budgeting 50.
Yeah, so we took 40, I'm sorry, 46,000.
Got it, okay. And then just, and again, it goes back to Mike's point, and just again, to clear up, I guess, a little piece of it for Chief Ward. When you're talking about investigations, you're talking about personnel investigations or criminal investigations involving personnel, and the reason I ask is because I would just imagine that there's some layers there of internal affairs, union reps, there's like a layer, a system in place that manages this, and so I was just interested in understanding between an internal affairs investigation, a union rep, and/or whether or not these are criminal or personnel matters that begin at criminal investigations, and where that, now, it only goes to, because you jumped in there, it kind of raised those questions having nothing to do with anything, but just to clear that up for me.
Basically, what you have several different layers, and it really depends on the nature of the acts that are involved. You can have a criminal investigation which involves non-police personnel that we may start an investigation on. We can have an allegation of a possibility of a criminal incident or an improper conduct on personnel other than police personnel per se. At that point, once we're done with that, there needs to be somebody, once we find no criminality, then there needs to be an avenue or venue, which was generally the findings were turned over to the manager, who then in turn would turn it over to the labor attorneys to follow up on. And a lot of times it came down to us having to confer with labor attorneys, at which point they, what information they needed from us, where this demarcation line was once we found that there was no criminal actions. That's on a non-police personnel type of situation. In an internal affairs, obviously there is an internal affairs if it involves police or public officials. Where we're doing that investigation, obviously there are layers, as you said, of internal affairs. There's people that come across, but internal affairs also covers from full criminal to administrative to basically complaints. The way our system works is anytime anybody complains about one of our personnel officers, it has to go through internal affairs, be deemed whether or not it is being followed through into internal affairs, or whether it's just an administrative or a personnel issue. Once it gets administrative or personnel, depending on the nature of it, the nature of the complaint, it is either handled through the supervisory staff, if it's just a basic demeanor complaint, whatnot, we have a tracking system for that. If it is something beyond that, where it's an administrative issue, that we then have to seek advice on appropriate penalties, if you will. The prior structure was we'd contact, with the manager's permission, be contacting labor attorneys for billable hours, so we could at least find out what is the appropriate discipline to go forward. Because if you overhit if you lay it on too heavy, then you've risked the possibility of saying that you hit it too heavy in litigation. And then there's also what is appropriate as far as civil service is concerned, based on past judgments. So that's where I foresee some of the benefit coming along on that aspect also. Mostly my point is just having the benefit of having that easy transition into it. If we immediately recognize something is not a criminal nature, doesn't involve an officer, or if it involves an employee, that can immediately be turned over to HR. HR then can also give us advice. One of the issues with a part-time person, and I don't want to get too far, is when they're here. Part-time is only here part-time. The reality is, with the exception of police, fire, and EMS, the village is here on a Monday through Friday type of situation, whereas part-time becomes difficult because we work shift work, and getting people in and meeting people together can be somewhat problematic. Yeah. That would be about the scope. But did I answer good enough?
Yeah, pretty much. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have any other issues or questions, Susan?
No, it just, let me just look at one other thing. Hold on. Okay, no other questions right now.
Okay. I'll just weigh in on this particular subject, and then what I think we'll do is we'll each sort of spend a minute at how much time we want, sort of speaking to these options before us. And again, in terms of the options, what we're looking for tonight is just get a majority of the council, if not the full council, to support one of these, so we can put it in ordinance form and introduce it next week. That doesn't finish this debate. Like any ordinance, once we introduce it, we can still discuss it. The public is encouraged to still come forward, and so that conversation continues, but because we're on a timeline, we just want to get it introduced next week. On the issue of HR person, I'll tell you, having been on the council for almost 7 years now, it's one of these issues I remember from the very beginning of my time on the council. We talked about either that there should be a deputy village manager or an HR, we used to call it personnel director, but I guess that was old school. An HR rep, because it is a big organization, it's a sizable organization. You said 275. And the truth of the matter is, village, in terms of village government, our most important resource are our people. And there are a lot of issues, disciplinary we talked about, but there's also development issues. And so to me, it's been one of the greatest needs, and I was glad to see it partially filled, and I definitely support a full-time HR person for the reasons sort of outlined here, the economic as well as those that the chief has spoken to, Tom has spoken to, and the village manager has spoken to. But just from my own observations over the years, it just seems like that is money well spent. That's a good investment, because that is an investment in our people. So, having said that, why don't we, I don't know who wants to be the first to sort of weigh in on a position. All right, Mike.
So this is the options presented?
Yeah.
Okay. So, in going through the budget and looking at some of the options, some of the details, some of the headline numbers, I'd be inclined to go with the staff recommended budget. I believe there's a need for investment in technology, and it's in there, and it touches on some quality of life issues, getting the tree wells downtown cleaned up, and investing in development and staff. However, the only hang-up I have is the HR position, but I would just need some additional time to digest some of the information that some of the newer details that I just received today about that, and I just need a little more time with that, but my recommendation would be to go with the recommended budget, and that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Albert?
No, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Michael gave some good reasons, which I won't repeat, but as a member of the board of directors, and that's kind of how I view this, I don't believe in micromanaging. I'd like to know and always test the proposition that we have the right management in place. I think that's the role of the board of directors. So I think we have to give some leeway, if we think we have the right management in place, to management and let them use their discretion in running the business using private sector lingo. So I look at this budget in a very simplistic way, because I think it is a simple budget. You have $371,000 increase over last year's budget that accounts for the tax increase, et cetera, et cetera. That's the increase in the tax levy. And coincidentally, we have a $367,000 increase in the mandated police department salary increases. That's an overhang of an old collective bargaining agreement that we have inherited. So there's a canceling right there. So now you say, well, we have a flat budget then, because the increase is absorbed, the salary increase to the police department is absorbed by the tax increase. Yes, but let's not overlook the dividend that we get from the new collective bargaining agreement with the fire department, which produces, and there's that number again, about round them off, about $350,000 benefit. So essentially what this whole budget reduces to is we have $350,000 cost reduction thanks to the new fire department collective bargaining agreement. We have a $350,000 increase in salary to the police department, and we're willing to offset that by a $350,000 increase in the levy, so that at the end of the day we can have the rest of the world, the rest of the village government world, share the $350,000 fire department dividend. It's that simple in my mind. To have $350,000 available to do all the things that are pictured in this budget, increasing the surplus and some of the things that Councilman Seaton referred to, I think is pretty remarkable. And I certainly will defer to the management team as to how to spend that $350,000. It's not exactly largesse and an overabundance of resources, and even I trust you to spend it and spend it wisely, and you've demonstrated you will. So, very simple budget, $350,000 increase is basically all that's there, because however you look at it, that's the only extra expenditure that's reflected in this budget, and that's a pretty small increase, particularly after 2 years of zero increase. I'd like to go with another zero budget if we could, but I know what that would mean. I mean, I know we're at the point where we wouldn't have that technology investment, and we would really be putting this on the backs of the employees now at this point. I think a lot of the fat's has been addressed in the prior budget. So anyway, so I defer to your recommendation.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Albert. Susan?
I actually agree with both Mike's observation and Albert's. Obviously, the difference for me is always that, although not micromanaging, the obvious difference between private and public sector is that, the private sector is generating revenue by way of sales and volume, and this revenue is borne by taxpayers, so there's that very significant difference in where the money comes from. And so for that, those questions that Mike poses become more, I guess from my perspective, more relevant, not in the context of micromanaging, but in the context of the taxpayers will shoulder the burden of this. And so in that regard, I'm actually have been concerned, and I expressed the concern with some of the increases to salaries in some departments, and I think it's a 39 or 40% increase maybe in code enforcement, and the increase in the manager's department. So I too have been concerned. And while I do somewhat support the recommended budget because of the obvious benefits, the technology, the parking utility, which certainly needs to be better managed, certainly developing a disaster recovery plan, the aesthetics of the village, the quality of life issues, I'm certainly concerned with some of the increases to salaries. So I'm leaning towards the recommended budget, but I do have some reservations with those increases, and I think that's where I'm at. I think I just need to study that a little bit further, especially given the benefits packages and everything. So it's not micromanaging, it's just a very real idea that this comes from somebody's tax dollars. So, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Susan. And I too support the recommended budget. For the last couple of years, last few years, there was some of us who've been pushing for zero tax increases. And again, we were told originally, and I remember sitting here told the sky was going to fall, but there were some of us that really felt that we needed to do that we needed to bring the village's fiscal house into order. We needed to bring it into line with the new normal being faced by folks in the private sector and many of the residents that live in our village. And I think we've done that. And we did that because we felt there was, after years of many tax increases, there was a lot of fat on the bones. But I think now we're starting to see bone. And I think we need to make some smart investments, and I think that's what this budget does. It really does strike that balance between meeting our near-term needs and making some important investments for the future, and investments in people and investments in technology. And so it does strike that right balance. I think it's fiscally responsible, and I feel comfortable supporting that. So,
maybe it's just make, it's not a comment as much as it is a question. There's another item in here, though, that's somewhat historic in nature that we have to absorb, and I'm thinking about the increase in the blue and white agreement, whereas I recall this budget is picking up a look back of 1 year plus this year. Is that?
I think it's actually picking up a look back of at least 2 years,
2
right,
years.
Steve?
Okay,
It's
it's 2 years.
151515 cumulative.
Right.
So that's part of the increase in the salary line is that cumulative impact of the blue and whites because the contract was done late.
Yeah, and that struck me too when we were going through it, that, here you have an agreement, because the agreement was slow in coming, the collective bargaining agreement with the blue and white employees, blue and white collar employees, it resulted in having this carry over into this year of not only 1 but 2 prior years increases.
Correct.
And even that is covered by the
It is.
The relatively small $350,000 increase, so there, I mean, while there is an increase, it isn't much of an increase when you cut through all the, the mandated obligations that we have.
Yeah, I mean, there were some significant increases, but John promises me next year it's going to be the other way around. Right, John?
Well, based on the fact that retirements alone, and, bring on new people, just the difference in salaries, we should probably see it at this same level of reduction in overall S&W for the first couple of years, as you would expect as these newer personnel transition. And hopefully, with positive negotiations, there'll even be more benefits moving forward in the long term for the village.
Right, so I think that's what we have to look forward to next year. I mean, we have certain things that we have to recoup as well, and we'll have to figure out, how we make up the FEMA difference. But again, we're leaving a little bit more in surplus. And there's some thoughts that come to me occasionally on revenue enhancement that we could start thinking through as well, because it's nice to up the revenue side of the house if we can, right? So.
Good, so I think we're all set to introduce an ordinance with the recommended budget proposal.
Did you want me to?
And again, again, I just want to underscore this for members of the council as well as members of the public. This conversation continues. We're just introducing the budget, and there are still several weeks until we actually will act on it.
I was just going to ask, did you want me to read Councilwoman Hauk's statement?
Oh, sure.
That she sent?
Yeah.
She sent this to the council and the village manager, and she said, since I cannot be present tonight to present my thoughts for preparing our budget introduction on April 22nd, I thought I would re-emphasize my strong support for the 1.2% recommended 2015 budget. As elected officials in Ridgewood, it is our responsibility to provide a safe and comfortable environment for our citizens to live in, but we must dedicate the rest of our time to being fiscally responsible with our taxpayers' money. 3 years of cuts, previous administration, and 2 years of 0% tax increases, much of our budget's fixed costs between 2% and 9%, have taught us to operate cleanly and efficiently. Approving this budget will give Ridgewood the ability to be more efficient, have more productive employees, and to avoid errors. I've examined the recommended budget format line by line, and I feel that it lays a crucial foundation for better government. It cuts waste, protects our services, builds a stronger future for the village, and still leaves room for lower taxes next year when police contracts are renegotiated. Thank you, Councilwoman Gwen Hauk.
Great, thanks for that, Heather. And let me thank you and your leadership team for all the work you've put into this. It's been a great budget process. I know it's not over yet, but we're getting closer, and I think we're getting to a place that we all feel comfortable, so thank you.
Good.
So with that...
Do we need a motion?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I have to go to public comment.
Oh, public comments. But there's nobody from the public.
Any public comments? Well, don't be shy.
I guess this member of the public, this member of the public wants to thank the employees and of the village who have been with us through this process the whole way. We met on a Saturday and I think a Sunday from that.
Saturday is Sunday, right?
Saturday, Sunday, 2 afternoons, and we've seen the same faces in the room. So, I mean, really, thank you. It's about all of us, but you certainly make it clear that you're concerned, and I know it's a job, but you certainly make it look like it's more than that. So, thank you very much for that.
Yes, I'll say thank you, too. I wholly agree with Albert's comments. Thank you, everyone.
As do I. You guys are the best.
Thank you.
And with that, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Wow, there's time to eat between now and the board.
8 o'clock. It's not, it's basically